The massive display screen in the Galactic Defense Council chamber flickered with another report of an unusual engagement at the border. The assembled alien representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats as they watched the footage. What they saw made no sense at all. A human warship, designated HMS Paradox, had just defeated 3 standardized Frontier-class patrol vessels without following a single rule of space combat. The ship looked wrong. It moved wrong. Everything about it was wrong. And yet it won. Admiral Tom Wells of the Council's Strategic Command rubbed his 4 eyes with his upper appendages. "Play it again," he ordered, his voice carrying a mix of frustration and curiosity. The massive screen replayed the battle. The Paradox didn't maintain proper battle formation. Instead, it spun and twisted through space like a drunk dancer. Its hull was a mess of asymmetrical angles and exposed weapon systems that should have made it an easy target. The energy readings from its power core fluctuated wildly, suggesting terrible efficiency ratings. By all known military doctrine, this ship should have been destroyed in its first engagement. "This is the 4th encounter this month," Wells said, addressing the Council. "Each time, this human vessel breaks every rule in our combat manuals. Each time, it wins." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "We need answers." Across the chamber, Council member Rex leaned forward, his scaled skin reflecting the light from the tactical displays. "Have we confirmed the identity of its commander?" "Yes." Wells brought up a new image. Admiral James Anderson, Earth Space Force. His record is unusual. The Council chamber filled with murmurs as they read Anderson's file. He had graduated near the bottom of his class at the Earth Space Academy. His tactical scores were average at best, but his combat record showed victory after victory, each one achieved through what the report called unconventional methods. "I've met humans before," Council member Rex said. "They often think differently than us. But this is beyond different. Look at the ship's power routing." He pointed at a diagnostic scan. "They're bleeding energy through those exposed conduits. It's inefficient, wasteful, and yet it works." Wells finished. "The question is why." The Council's attention turned to a new arrival. Commander Vex entered the chamber, his movements precise and measured, exactly as expected from the Council's top military analyst. His chrome-plated exoskeleton gleamed under the chamber's lights as he approached the central podium. "Honorable Council," Vex began, "I've completed my initial analysis of the Paradox's combat footage. What we're seeing isn't chaos. It's a completely different approach to warfare." The display changed, showing a detailed scan of the Paradox's hull. "Look here," Vex pointed to what appeared to be exposed weapon mounts. "These aren't mistakes. They're deliberate. Every flaw we've identified serves a purpose we haven't understood yet." Wells leaned forward. "Explain." "The asymmetrical design. It plays havoc with standard targeting systems. They're designed to predict movement based on center of mass calculations. But the Paradox's mass is distributed so unevenly that our targeting computers can't establish a reliable solution." The Council members exchanged worried looks as Vex continued. "Those exposed weapon systems, half of them are decoys. They draw fire away from the real weapons, which are hidden in what appear to be structural weaknesses. And the power fluctuations. They're part of an adaptive system that can reroute energy faster than our ships can adjust their targeting. But it violates every principle of proper warship design." Rex protested. "The energy cost alone is offset by its combat effectiveness," Vex countered. "Humans have a saying, think outside the box." They didn't just think outside it. They built a ship that makes the box meaningless. The chamber's main door opened again. A junior analyst rushed in, holding a datapad. "Admiral Wells, sir, the Paradox. It's engaged another patrol fleet." The main screen switched to live footage. The human warship was dancing through space again, its weird movements making it look like it would shake itself apart. 3 standardized patrol ships moved to intercept it, their formations perfect, their approaches textbook examples of proper military doctrine. The paradox's apparent random tumbling suddenly transformed into a precise spiral. Energy readings spiked from what they had thought were waste heat vents. The patrol ship's sensors, calibrated to detect standard weapon signatures, missed the actual attack completely. By the time they realized the decoy weapons were decoys, the real ones had already fired. The battle was over in minutes. The patrol ships, their perfect formations disrupted, their standard tactics useless, retreated with significant damage. The paradox, despite its flawed design, was barely scratched. Impossible, Rex whispered. Their power systems should have overloaded. Their structural integrity should have failed. They're targeting computers. They're not using targeting computers, Vex said quietly. At least, not like ours. Look at the response times. Those are human reactions, augmented but not controlled by machines. They're flying that thing partly by instinct. Wells stood up, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. We need to understand this. Not just the ship, the thinking behind it. Vex, I'm assigning you to make contact with Admiral Anderson. Find out how and why they built this ship. Find out what other surprises they have. Most importantly, find out if this is just one human's madness, or if this represents a fundamental difference in how they approach warfare. Sir, Vex hesitated. What if it's both? What if their madness is their method? The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. On the main screen, the paradox was powering down its systems, its impossible design still intact, its violations of proper military doctrine, having once again led to victory. Then, Wells said slowly, we need to decide if our rules are as universal as we thought they were. He turned to address the full council. For centuries, we've believed that proper ship design, proper tactical doctrine, proper military thinking were matters of physics and logic. Now we have humans showing us that maybe, just maybe, we've been limiting ourselves. Rex stood up, his scales rattling with agitation. Are you suggesting we abandon our proven methods? Our standardized designs? Our tactical doctrines that have served us for generations? No, Wells replied. I'm suggesting we learn. The humans have shown us that there's more than one way to build a warship, more than one way to fight, more than one way to win. He looked around the chamber. We thought we knew all the rules. The humans are teaching us that knowing when to break them might be the most important rule of all. The council chamber erupted in debate. On the screen, the paradox hung in space, its weird angles and exposed systems looking less like flaws now and more like questions. Questions about everything the council thought they knew about proper warfare. Questions about whether breaking all the rules at once might sometimes be the best strategy of all. And somewhere on that impossible ship, Admiral James Anderson was probably smiling, knowing that sometimes the best way to make people question their assumptions was to break every single one of them at once. Commander Vex stood in the docking bay of the HMS Paradox, his chrome exoskeleton reflecting the unusual lighting patterns that seemed to pulse through the ship's internal structure. Everything about this vessel challenged his understanding of proper starship design. Even the docking bay was wrong. Its walls curved in ways that defied standard architecture, and the gravity felt slightly uneven. 2 human guards escorted him through corridors that seemed to wind randomly. Their boots made different sounds on different sections of the floor, and Vex's sensors detected subtle variations in the metal's density. Nothing was standardized. Nothing was uniform. It made his analytical circuits buzz with confusion. Admiral Anderson will see you now, one of the guards said, stopping at what looked like a blank wall. A hidden door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing what had to be the strangest command center Vex had ever seen. The bridge of the paradox was circular, but not perfectly so. Workstations were arranged in what appeared to be a chaotic pattern, with crew members seated at different heights and angles. The main view screen wrapped around nearly 3/4 of the room, creating an immersive view of space that made Vex's stabilizers twitch. Admiral James Anderson stood in the center of this controlled chaos, studying a holographic display that flickered with constantly changing data. He turned to face Vex, and his smile seemed genuine. "Welcome aboard, Commander. I trust our artificial gravity hasn't made you too uncomfortable." "The varying gravity fields serve a purpose," Vex said. It wasn't a question. He'd learned enough about this ship to know that nothing was accidental. "Very good," Anderson nodded. "You're already thinking like we do. Every irregularity, every seeming flaw or inefficiency, they're all tools. Would you like to understand how?" Vex's analytical processors hummed. "The Council sent me to study your ship, your methods. They want to understand why you break every rule of proper warship design." Anderson laughed, the sound echoing oddly in the asymmetrical space. "Break the rules?" "No, Commander. We're following a different set of rules entirely." He gestured to the holographic display. "Look at this. Standard military doctrine says a ship's power core should be perfectly stable, its output carefully regulated. We decided to do something else." The display showed the Paradox's power distribution system. Energy flowed through the ship like water through a creek, finding new paths, creating eddies and currents. Some conduits pulse with more power than they should handle, while others sat nearly dormant. "Your power system is unstable," Vex observed. "It should overload within hours." "But it doesn't," Anderson said, "because instability, properly managed, is more adaptable than stability. When we take damage, the power finds new routes automatically. No need for complex repair protocols. It flows where it needs to go." He waved a hand, and the display changed to show the ship's outer hull. "Look at our weapon mounts. Everyone says they should be protected, hidden behind armor. We put some of them right out in the open." "Decoys," Vex said, remembering the battle footage. "But not all of them. Some are real. And some are both," Anderson grinned. "Or neither. The point is, the enemy never knows. They waste time and energy trying to figure out which threats are real, while our actual attacks come from directions they never expect." An alarm sounded, not the harsh blare Vex expected, but a complex pattern of tones that seemed to carry more information than a simple alert. The crew responded instantly, their movements smooth and practiced. "Spatial anomaly detected," an officer reported. "Unknown energy signature, bearing 03 Mark II. Anderson's expression turned serious. "Show me." The wraparound view screen filled with an image of what looked like a tear in space itself. Energy readings spiked across multiple spectrums, none of them matching known patterns. "Perfect timing," Anderson said to Vex. "Want to see why we built this ship the way we did? Watch and learn." The Paradox moved toward the anomaly, its seemingly random course actually a carefully planned approach. Vex watched in fascination as the ship's irregular power distribution automatically adjusted to the strange energy patterns emanating from the tear in space. "Standard ships would be trying to maintain stable power levels right now," Anderson explained. "Their rigid designs would fight against the anomaly's effects. But us." He gestured at the flowing power readings. "We're letting our systems adapt, dancing with the chaos instead of fighting it." The anomaly pulsed, sending out a wave of energy that would have disrupted normal shield configurations. But the Paradox's asymmetrical shield geometry scattered the energy instead of trying to block it. The ship's exposed weapon systems absorbed some of the power, feeding it back into the adaptive power grid. "Impossible," Vex whispered. "You're using the anomaly's own energy against it. But the calculations required aren't calculations at all," Anderson finished. "At least, not the kind you're thinking of. We built this ship to work with natural chaos, not against it. Our computers don't try to predict everything. They react, adapt, flow with the changes." The anomaly grew larger, its energy patterns becoming more erratic. Standard protocol would have called for a retreat, a careful withdrawal to a safe distance. Instead, Anderson ordered the ship closer. "The irregularities in our hull design," he explained as they approached. "They're not just for confusing enemy targeting systems. They create micro-distortions in spacetime, usually too small to matter, but in situations like this, the paradox's weird angles and uneven surfaces began to interact with the anomaly's energy field. Where a standard ship's uniform hull would have been torn apart, the human vessel's deliberate imperfections created interference patterns that stabilized the surrounding space. You designed a ship that breaks physics, Vex realized. No, you designed a ship that works with broken physics. Anderson nodded. The universe isn't neat and orderly, Commander. Space-time itself is full of wrinkles and tears. We just built a ship that treats these irregularities as features, not bugs. The anomaly began to collapse in on itself, its energy dispersing harmlessly through paths created by the paradox's unusual design. What could have been a disaster for a conventional vessel had become just another demonstration of human engineering philosophy. This is why we break your rules, Anderson said quietly, because the universe breaks them all the time. The trick isn't to impose order on chaos, it's to make chaos work for you. Vex's analytical systems were recording everything, but he knew the real lesson wasn't in the technical details. It was in the fundamental difference between how humans and the Council approached problems. Your ship, he said slowly, it's not just a weapon. It's a statement about how humans see the universe. Anderson smiled. Now you're getting it. We didn't set out to break rules, Commander. We just refused to accept that the rules we were given were the only ones that mattered. As the paradox moved away from where the anomaly had been, Vex watched the crew working at their oddly placed stations, the power flowing through its irregular paths, the exposed weapons that might or might not be real. He had come to study a warship and found himself studying humanity itself. I think, he said carefully, my report to the Council is going to be very interesting. Tell them this, Anderson replied. Tell them that sometimes the best way to follow the rules of the universe is to break all the rules we make up about it. The paradox's engines pulsed with power that should have torn them apart, carrying the ship through space in ways that should have been impossible. But then, Vex was beginning to learn that impossible meant something very different to humans than it did to everyone else. The emergency alert shattered the usual calm of the Galactic Defense Council chamber. Warning lights pulsed as reports flooded in from the outer colonies. Admiral Wells' four eyes widened as he read the incoming data. The swarm, he announced, his voice grave. They'd broken through the 7th defense line. 3 colony worlds are under attack. The chamber erupted in chaos. The swarm was every spacefaring race's nightmare, a hostile force of biomechanical ships that adapted to any standard military strategy used against them. Traditional defense fleets had proven increasingly ineffective against their evolving tactics. Commander Vex, still aboard the HMS Paradox for his investigation, received the alert at the same time. He turned to Admiral Anderson, expecting to see concern. Instead, the human wore an expression Vex's analytical systems couldn't quite decode, something between a grin and a predator's focus. Request permission to assist, Anderson said, opening a channel to the Council. The ship's unusual communications array made the transmission look like background radiation to anyone who might be listening. The Council's response was immediate and negative. Denied, Admiral Wells stated. The paradox is an untested variable. We cannot risk. With respect, Anderson interrupted, being an untested variable is exactly why we might succeed where standard ships are failing. The swarm adapts to patterns. We don't have any. The largest colony under attack, New Haven, was home to over 2 million civilians. Standard evacuation protocols were already failing as the swarmed ships tore through the defense fleet's formations. Every counterattack based on established military doctrine was anticipated and countered. Wells looked at the tactical display, watching as more standard patrol ships fell to the swarm's attacks. The evacuation ships won't escape in time, he said quietly. Then let us help, Anderson pressed. You've seen what the paradox can do. Let us show you what it was built for. The council chamber fell silent. Rex, his scales dark with stress, spoke first. Our entire defense strategy is failing. Perhaps it's time to try something that breaks all the rules. Wells nodded slowly. Permission granted. Paradox. But be warned, the swarm adapts quickly. Whatever tricks your ship has, you may only get one chance to use them. Anderson's smile grew wider. They can't adapt to what they can't predict. And they definitely can't predict this. He turned to his crew. Battle stations. Let's show them why humans build ships that don't make sense. The Paradox's engines roared to life, their power signatures deliberately irregular. As they approached the battle zone, Vex watched in fascination as the ship's systems began to reconfigure themselves in ways that violated every principle of proper combat procedure. Shouldn't we form up with the remaining defense fleet? Vex asked, watching as Anderson deliberately positioned the ship away from any sensible tactical position. Nope, Anderson replied. In fact, we're going to do exactly what the swarm thinks is impossible. He addressed his crew. Initiate the Chaos Protocol. The ship's power core began to pulse in patterns that should have torn it apart. The exposed weapon systems started cycling through random energy states, creating a sensor profile that looked like a dozen different ships overlapped. The swarm noticed them immediately. Their biomechanical ships turned toward the Paradox, their adaptive systems trying to analyze this new threat. But the harder they tried to predict the human ship's capabilities, the more confused their collective intelligence became. They're attempting to calculate our optimal attack patterns, Anderson explained to Vex. But we don't have any. Every system on this ship is designed to be unpredictable. They can't adapt to chaos itself. The Paradox charged straight at the swarm fleet, its irregular hull creating spatial distortions that made targeting systems useless. What looked like exposed weaknesses turned out to be trap after trap, each one designed to waste the swarm's adaptive capabilities on solving problems that didn't actually exist. Now, Anderson commanded, show them what real chaos looks like. The ship's weapon systems came alive, but not in any way Vex had ever seen before. Some of the exposed weapons were firing blanks, creating false energy signatures that the swarm tried to adapt to. Others were combining their fire in ways that changed with each shot. The real attacks came from systems that looked damaged or inactive, striking from angles that should have been impossible. Your ship, Vex realized, watching as the swarm's formations began to break apart, it's not just breaking the rules of warfare. It's making the rules meaningless. Anderson nodded. The swarm beats standard ships because it learns their patterns. We win because we don't have any patterns to learn. The evacuation ships, protected by the Paradox's confusing defense screen, began to pull away from New Haven. The swarm, its adaptive algorithms overwhelmed by the human ship's controlled chaos, couldn't maintain a coherent attack strategy. But the swarm was still dangerous. A group of their ships, giving up on trying to predict the Paradox's behavior, simply charged straight at it. The human vessel took hits, its hull breached in multiple places. Direct hits, Vex announced, his sensors trying to calculate the damage. Your power grid is. He stopped, watching in amazement as the ship's irregular power distribution simply routed around the damaged sections, finding new paths that made even less sense than the original ones. The damage makes us even harder to predict. Anderson grinned. On a normal ship, losing these systems would cripple us. On the Paradox, it just adds another layer of chaos to work with. The battle continued, but it wasn't really a battle anymore. It was more like a dance, with the Paradox leading and the swarm unable to follow the steps. Every time their adaptive systems thought they had figured out a pattern, the human ship would do something completely different. Finally, unable to cope with an enemy that refused to follow any logical combat doctrine, the swarm began to retreat. Their collective intelligence had encountered something it couldn't adapt to: human unpredictability weaponized into ship form. As the last of the evacuation ships jumped to safety, Anderson opened a channel to the Council. New Haven is secure. The swarm is withdrawing. And I believe Commander Vex has some interesting observations for his report. Vex looked at the tactical displays, at the retreat of an enemy that had never been defeated by conventional means, at the impossible ship that had done it by breaking every rule in the book. Yes, he said slowly. I believe I understand now. The paradox isn't flawed. It's just operating on principles we never considered valid. The principles of controlled chaos, Anderson agreed, of turning unpredictability into an advantage, of understanding that sometimes the best way to win isn't to play by the rules, it's to change the game entirely. The paradox's engines pulsed with their signature irregular rhythm, carrying the ship back toward Council space. Behind them, the swarm fled from the first enemy they couldn't categorize, analyze, or adapt to. They had evolved to counter every standard military strategy in the galaxy, but they had never evolved to handle humans. And now, watching the damage reports that somehow made the ship more effective instead of less, Vex wondered if maybe that was the point all along. Sometimes the best defense against adaptation wasn't better patterns. It was having no patterns at all. The repair crews swarmed over the Paradox's hull, their confusion evident as they tried to follow its unusual maintenance protocols. 2 days had passed since the battle with the swarm, and the Council's engineering teams were still struggling to understand how the damaged ship had actually performed better after taking hits. Admiral Anderson stood with Commander Vex in one of the ship's irregular corridors, watching through a viewport as alien technicians attempted to repair what they thought was battle damage. Should we tell them that Dent is supposed to be there? Anderson asked, amusement in his voice. They wouldn't believe you, Vex replied. His analytical systems had finally stopped trying to make sense of the paradox's design and started accepting it for what it was. Just like they won't believe my report without proof. Anderson nodded toward a nearby door. Then let's give them proof. It's time you saw the heart of our ship. The door opened to reveal what should have been the main engineering bay. Instead, Vex found himself in a space that defied every principle of starship design he had ever known. The Paradox's power core wasn't a single unit, but a distributed network of smaller reactors, all running at different power levels and frequencies. Welcome to the Chaos Engine, Anderson said proudly. The real reason our ship can do what it does. Vex's sensors tried to map the energy flows and gave up. Power moved through the system like water through a rapids, finding new paths, creating eddies and currents that should have been inefficient, but somehow produced more output than a standard drive core. It's beautiful, Vex said, surprising himself with the admission. Completely wrong by every standard we have, but beautiful. That's humanity in a nutshell. Anderson laughed. We look at your perfect designs, your flawless systems, and we see limitations. Where you see chaos, we see possibilities. A group of Council engineers entered the bay, led by Master Technician Reed, their tools ready to begin standardizing the power systems. They stopped short at the sight of the Chaos Engine. This is impossible, Reed declared, his sensor arrays twitching. The power fluctuations alone should tear the ship apart. The feedback loops should destroy us? Anderson finished. That's what everyone says. But look closer. The fluctuations aren't random. The feedback isn't uncontrolled. It's all part of a system that works precisely because it doesn't try to be perfect. Reed's engineering team spread out through the bay, their instruments recording readings that violated dozens of fundamental design principles. But they couldn't argue with the results. The Paradox had done what their perfectly designed ships could not. The swarm adapted to our standard ships because they could predict how they would work, Vex explained to the engineers. They couldn't adapt to the Paradox because it's always adapting to itself. Anderson walked over to a control panel that looked more like an artist's sketch than a proper interface. Watch this, he said, entering a command. The Chaos Engine's output shifted, its power flows reorganizing themselves in ways that made the engineering team's instruments spark with confusion. The ship's systems, rather than fighting against the change, simply flowed with it, finding new configurations that worked even better than the old ones. This is why we exposed some of our weapons, Anderson continued. Why we built irregular corridors and uneven power conduits. The whole ship is one big adaptive system. It doesn't just break the rules. It proves the rules were never as absolute as we thought. Reed studied the readings with growing fascination. The energy efficiency is actually higher than our standard cores, he admitted. But how do you control it? How do you prevent it from becoming truly random? We don't. Anderson smiled. We guide it. Think of it like riding a wave. You don't control the ocean. You work with it, adapt to it, use its power instead of fighting it. Vex watched as understanding began to dawn on the engineering team's faces. They had come to fix what they thought was broken, only to find something that worked better precisely because it embraced imperfection. A communication from the council interrupted their discussion. Admiral Wells' hologram appeared in the engineering bay, his 4 eyes taking in the organized chaos around him. The council has reviewed Commander Vex's preliminary report, Wells announced. We've also analyzed the battle data from the swarm engagement. We have questions. Just questions, Anderson asked, knowing there had to be more. And a request, Wells continued. We want to understand how to build ships like the Paradox. Not copies. We realize now that standardization is what made us vulnerable to the swarm. We want to learn your approach to engineering, your way of thinking. Anderson exchanged glances with Vex. It won't be easy, he warned. You'll have to unlearn a lot of things you think you know about proper ship design. We're aware, Wells replied. That's why we're not just asking for technical data. We're establishing a new division of the Defense Force, the Irregular Warfare Development Group, and we want you, Admiral Anderson, to lead it. The engineering bay fell silent except for the harmonious discord of the Chaos engine. Anderson looked around at the alien faces watching him, Vex with his analytical curiosity, Reed with his growing excitement, the engineering team with their mixture of confusion and wonder. On one condition, Anderson said finally, we don't just teach the technical details. We teach the philosophy behind them. The human way of looking at problems and seeing opportunities where others see flaws. Agreed, Wells nodded. The swarm showed us the limitations of our standard approach. You showed us there's another way. Perhaps, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Perhaps breaking all the rules at once isn't just a valid strategy. Maybe it's the next step in our evolution as spacefaring races. As if to emphasize the point, the Chaos engine shifted again. Its power flows finding new patterns that somehow worked even better than before. The engineering team's instruments tried to analyze the changes and failed completely. That's the real lesson of the paradox, Anderson said, watching their reactions. It's not just about building better warships. It's about understanding that perfection isn't always perfect, that chaos can be controlled without being contained, that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to embrace everything we think is wrong about it. Vex's analytical systems had finally given up trying to categorize what he was seeing. Instead, he found himself doing something very human, appreciating the beauty of imperfection. I believe, he said, my final report to the Council will require a new category. We need a term for engineering principles that work precisely because they break all the rules at once. We have a term for that. Anderson grinned. We call it human ingenuity. The paradox's systems hummed around them, its irregular design and controlled chaos a testament to a different way of thinking about the universe. In breaking every rule of proper warship design, it had done more than just defeat an enemy. It had opened up new possibilities for everyone. And somewhere in deep space, the swarm was still trying to adapt to a ship that refused to make sense. They would probably never understand that this was exactly the point. Sometimes, breaking all the rules wasn't just an option. It was the best option of all. 6 months had passed since the Paradox's battle with the swarm. The Galactic Defense Academy's main lecture hall was packed with students from a dozen different species, all waiting for their new instructor. Commander Vex stood at the back of the room, his chrome exoskeleton reflecting the morning light as Admiral Anderson walked to the front. "Welcome to Advanced Irregular Engineering," Anderson began, looking out at the eager faces, or as we like to call it, how to break every rule and get away with it. A ripple of uncertain laughter moved through the crowd. They weren't sure if he was joking. He wasn't. The main display screen lit up with an image of the Paradox, now the flagship of the newly formed Irregular Warfare Fleet. But it was no longer alone. Around it flew ships of different designs, each one breaking traditional rules in its own unique way. The Paradox was just the beginning, Anderson continued. What we learned from her has led to a complete revolution in how we think about ship design. Commander Vex, would you like to show them our latest creation? Vex stepped forward, his analytical systems now completely comfortable with the controlled chaos around him. The display changed to show a new vessel under construction. The alien students leaned forward, their confusion evident. "This is the impossible," Vex announced. "The first ship designed jointly by human and council engineers using the new principles we learned from the Paradox. As you can see, it appears to be built entirely wrong." The ship on the screen seemed to defy basic geometry. Its hull was a series of nested asymmetrical shapes that looked like they had been sketched by a child. Power conduits wound through its structure like tangled vines, and its weapon systems seemed to be placed at random. "But that's exactly why it works," Anderson added. "Each apparent flaw is a feature. Each broken rule serves a purpose. Let me show you how." Over the next hour, Anderson and Vex walked the students through the new principles of irregular engineering. They explained how controlled chaos could be more efficient than rigid order, how imperfection could be more adaptable than perfection, and how breaking all the rules at once could sometimes be the most logical choice of all. "The swarm hasn't been seen since their encounter with the Paradox," Vex told the class. "Our analysis suggests they're still trying to develop countermeasures. But how do you counter something that doesn't follow any pattern? How do you adapt to a ship that's always adapting to itself?" A student raised their hand, their 4 tentacles waving nervously. "But what about maintenance? How do we repair systems that aren't supposed to be standardized?" Anderson smiled. "That's the beauty of it. These ships don't break down, they evolve. When something stops working one way, the adaptive systems find a new way that works even better. Traditional engineers see damage as a problem to fix. We see it as an opportunity for the ship to reinvent itself." The display showed footage from recent trials. The impossible, living up to its name, performed maneuvers that should have torn it apart. Instead, its seemingly random design allowed it to move in ways that standard ships couldn't even attempt. "The real challenge," Anderson continued, "isn't learning the technical details. It's learning to think differently, to see chaos not as an enemy to be controlled, but as a tool to be used. To understand that sometimes the best solution is the one that seems to make the least sense." Another student spoke up, their scales shimmering with excitement. "Is it true that the Council is planning to rebuild the entire defense fleet using these principles?" "Not exactly," Vex answered. "We're not replacing the standard ships, we're complementing them. The lesson of the Paradox wasn't that traditional design is wrong. It's that there's room for both approaches. Sometimes you need perfect order. Sometimes you need perfect chaos. The trick is knowing when to use which." Anderson walked among the students, looking at their faces. He saw confusion there, but also understanding beginning to dawn. They were starting to see what humans had always known, that rules were made to be broken, but breaking them had to serve a purpose. "Your first assignment," he announced, "is to design a ship that breaks at least 3 fundamental laws of proper engineering. But, and this is the important part, you have to prove that breaking those laws makes the ship work better, not worse." The room buzzed with excitement and apprehension. Some students immediately began sketching impossible designs. Others sat frozen, their traditional training warring with these new ideas. "Remember," Vex added, "the goal isn't to break rules for the sake of breaking them. It's to understand why the rules exist and then find cases where breaking them serves a greater purpose. A message flashed on the main screen. A priority alert from the council. Anderson read it and grinned. Speaking of which, it seems we have a practical demonstration. Long-range sensors have detected an unknown anomaly in Sector 7. The kind of thing that would tear a normal ship apart. The students watched as live footage showed the impossible moving to investigate. The ship's irregular design began interacting with the anomaly in ways that defied standard physics. Where a normal vessel would have struggled, this one practically danced with the spatial distortions. This, Anderson said proudly, is why we build ships that don't make sense. Because the universe itself doesn't always make sense. Sometimes you have to fight chaos with chaos. Sometimes you have to break the rules to follow the deeper rules that we're only beginning to understand. Vex's analytical systems recorded the students' reactions, noting the moment when confusion transformed into comprehension. They were beginning to see what he had learned aboard the Paradox, that there was a method to human madness, a logic to their apparent lack of logic. Class dismissed, Anderson announced. But remember, tomorrow we start learning how to really break the rules. Everything you know about proper ship design. Be prepared to unlearn it all. Because sometimes the best way to follow the rules of the universe is to break every other rule we've made up about it. As the students filed out, still discussing the impossible ships and their even more impossible capabilities, Vex turned to Anderson. They're starting to understand, he said, just like I did. Anderson nodded, watching as the impossible continued its dance with the anomaly on the main screen. That's the real victory, he said. Not beating the swarm, not building better ships. Teaching others to see what we see, that the universe is too big, too strange, and too wonderful to be bound by any set of rules we try to impose on it. The impossible completed its mission, its chaotic design having turned what should have been a deadly threat into an opportunity for discovery. Just like the Paradox before it, it had proven that sometimes the best way to deal with an impossible situation was to build an impossible solution. And in the lecture hall of the Galactic Defense Academy, a new generation of engineers was learning the most important lesson of all, that rules were made to be broken, but only if you could prove that breaking them made everything work better in the end.